on Wi-Fi.
Oh, there we go.
Awesome. Can people hear us? If you want to send something through to the chat, that'd be great.
Yep, we've got thumbs up.
Thumbs up, perfect. Welcome everyone. So really appreciate you taking time out of your morning to join us. I'm Jack. I work for the City of Melbourne running the CitySwitch program, and I'll let the others introduce themselves. So Tanya, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh no, I'll come later.
You'll come later.
Yeah.
But basically, CitySwitch is here, like we're net zero education program. Some of you may have heard of us before, some of you might not have, but some of you might have gotten the links through me and some of you might have gotten the links through Paul as well. So Paul and I have a bit of a working relationship between CitySwitch and Australian Legal Sector Alliance. Basically, we're got similar goals. You know, we want to improve sustainability. For me, it's all about reducing emissions in the city from office-based businesses, and for Paul, it's obviously about the legal sector. So I might let Paul introduce himself and Legal Sector Alliance if you haven't heard of it already.
Great, thanks, Jack. Yes, I'm Paul Vincaros from the Australian Legal Sector Alliance, and welcome everyone to today's session. Today's session is on enhancing sustainability in the supply chain, and this is a co-hosted event between AusLSA, CitySwitch and Lander Rogers. Today I'm joined by, as he's already introduced himself, Jack Blackwell from CitySwitch and Tanya Harris from Lander Rogers. Tanya will be presenting on today's topic. She comes from an extensive background in corporate climate change and sustainability consulting, and this includes work that she completed for CitySwitch previously on this topic while at Edge Impact. Today's session is a continuation of our programs to enhance the knowledge and internal capacity of our members to address challenging topics on corporate sustainability. Supply chain sustainability is one of those topics which is emerging and becoming increasingly important. Today's session is also an opportunity for us to strengthen our relationship with our partner organisations. So AusLSA works very closely with CitySwitch because our programs and reporting are very complementary to each other and are mutually beneficial to our members. So I'll now hand over back to Jack to talk to this a little bit further.
Thanks, Tanya. Do you mind doing the slides? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Can I get you do the acknowledgement?
Absolutely. So before we begin today, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're working. For us here in the room, it is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. It's particularly important this week is Reconciliation Week, and I'd also like to honour those from the stolen generation and remember those from Sorry Day, which was on Tuesday. Celebrate the 1967 referendum outcome, which commenced Reconciliation Week on Wednesday, and also to recognise the legal sector's contribution with the successful Mabo outcome in 1992 for native land title. For me, it's around storytelling and narrative, and I think it's really important for us to acknowledge Indigenous knowledge when it comes to ensuring a sustainable future for all. So over to you.
Thanks, Tanya. So CitySwitch, I just wanted to give everyone a bit of an overview of like why I'm here. I'm talking to law firms. Go to the next slide. Basically, we are a net zero education program. So CitySwitch is a program that councils run together in partnership. Basically, it was started by the City of Sydney and City of Melbourne together. We've got a lot of other councils that have joined, which I'll show on the next slide. But basically, what we try and do is we all realise that our cities have net zero targets. Especially our capital cities have a lot of office buildings in there, and the program started saying, well, we need to reduce our emissions to zero. First City of Melbourne's 2040, and a lot of emissions come from office-based businesses and tenancies in the city. So that's what we're all about. We're trying to educate those businesses that need some support around emissions reduction. And yeah, basically we cover pretty much all businesses that have an office. And yeah, basically all sectors as well, government, private, public, that sort of thing, and all sizes of businesses. We range from, I'll talk about members right at the end of the slide, but we range from, 1 to 2 people in an organisation all the way up to, big corporate banks and that sort of thing. And law firms, obviously, while we're here. Those are the participating councils, so City Sydney, Melbourne, Ballarat, Yarra, North Sydney, and City Port Phillip are the participating councils. Neighbours, which is a built environment rating scheme, if you haven't heard of that before, is an associate partner as well, and we try and encourage neighbours ratings through that program. It's quite a wide-ranging program. Those statistics are slightly different, but our annual report for this year isn't out yet. But roughly 9 to 10% of Australian office space is signed up to the program. But we'd like to grow that, obviously, or about 3 million square metres of net lettable area. Over 200 members with over 700 offices as well. So next slide. What we do is we do education campaigns, resources and materials, as well as developing a community of practice for educating businesses on how to get to net zero. We've got 7 different pathway steps with 16 different actions on different parts of reducing emissions in a business. So we take businesses for wherever they are on the journey when they join the program and basically help them out with whatever they need. Although it's shown as a roadmap, it's not a sequential thing. We basically meet businesses where they're at when they join the program about what help they need. So we do that by delivering education campaigns, as I said before. As part of those campaigns, we develop, webinars, tools and guidance and resources, as well as in-person workshops, as well as, basically connecting members together to learn from each other. And the next slide. As part of the CitySwitch program, we get members to self-report their emissions and their energy consumption and a few other qualitative things to help us track impact over time. So this is from last year's annual report, and that's all about basically we get some metrics about how emissions reduction is going in the city, and that enables councils to basically track the effectiveness of the program over time. So I haven't got this year's numbers because this will be the second year of the net zero framework, but people who are measuring their scope 1 and 2 emissions has gone up, funnily enough, from like 85 to 90%, which is great. So we want these numbers to be getting better over time. The office emissions intensity, we want to go down. We want the average star rating to go up. But basically we track our progress year on year from member self-reported data, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. This little star is like education campaigns that we've delivered already. And if you go to cityswitch.net.au, you will find, publicly available resources open to everyone on these topics on our website in our resources section. So we've covered a lot of the net zero pathway already from an education campaign perspective, but we're still got more to go as well. So we rely on member feedback on what to prioritise year on year that people need to understand. Why I've highlighted Greeny Supply Chain is that today's presentation from Tanya is based on the CitySwitch resources that we have on this topic as well.
And they're the best ones you've got.
They're the best ones we've got, and that's a big thing. And like I've been to a few conferences recently and everyone's trying to figure out what they want to do from a scope 3 supply chain, value chain emissions, even just understanding where to get data for emissions from your supply chain. As part of that as well, I talked about campaigns before. This is our current one. So what we're doing right now is a campaign on mandatory climate reporting. We've done webinars 1 and 2. The webinar 2 was yesterday. Those recordings will be up on our website shortly as well. But if you're interested in coming to understanding what the mandatory climate reporting process is, which is what's the legislation called?
It is AASB S2.
Yep. Basically on that requirement, and if it applies to your business, then feel free to register and watch the webinar series. It's one of our most popular campaigns yet, actually. Everyone wants to know about it. So this is basically an example of how CitySwitch delivers its, education is through, we'll partner with a consultant on a specialist topic, and we will develop resources and education webinars to, I guess, simplify that process for people just trying to understand what's going on. So obviously I'm here to, encourage you to join the program, but our point of difference as a CitySwitch program is it's backed by government, and it's all about detailed practical use information. So it's education, it's not a star rating. We might be able to help you achieve better ratings for your office tenancy. So example, through the Neighbours program. But we're not going to be like ranking you against your peers. It's just a purely supporting framework that now enables members to learn from our resources and from each other. So what we find through basically talking to me or, going to the in-person events is that members learn best from each other. So we'll often find that, someone's punching above their weight in one aspect of the net zero journey and is able to share that information with others. So, and vice versa. So that's one of the biggest things that we see by, being in the CitySwitch community is learning from other businesses and what they've done already, and our case studies. So case studies are similar to that, learning from other businesses, but we've got they're codified on our website for people to learn from. Bit more of the why join, but CitySwitch is a brand, and you can use it within your own business to say we're part of the program. We're part of the program. It's something like, these are our commitments under the program. We've got all these resources readily available to us, including ones for like setting up a green team in your office. So if one person's trying to do that, we've got resources about, how to get your team on board to be motivated for climate action. And we find that within some businesses, at least, it's like we're part of a program, so we sort of like can rally around that to take action. On to the next one. I talked about events before, but we've actually got our national awards events coming up in a couple of weeks, and a few of you, I think, would be invited as well. But basically, each year we try and celebrate the success of the program in general and of individual CitySwitch champions. We call them that for company achievements in emissions reduction in that year. So watch this space. Anyone can join. As I said on the title slide, it's free, and it's mainly office-based businesses. So knowledge work and legal firms obviously fit perfectly into that mold, as well as being mostly office-based business. It's free to join, but we don't give you grants or anything to pay for carbon accounts or anything like that. It's just free to sign up and get access to our educational resources and events. The only thing that we ask you to do is to have someone that we can talk to, and then commit to measuring your baseline scope 1 and 2 emissions. And I'll talk about what those are in a second if people don't know. But the annual reporting is key for us to measure, the impact of the program. And so basically you're paying in your time in giving us it's basically bills and a few questions about, what you do within your organisation to reduce your emissions, so that we can help design the program. And that data gets anonymised and goes into producing those figures that I showed you earlier in the presentation about member impact. And if you want to lead in the program, we want you to have net zero targets and at least start measuring all scopes of emissions. We know scope 3 is hard. We just want you to start thinking about it, and then potentially participate in net zero accreditation frameworks. So we've got a lot of members, and I've circled some of the law firms that are already part of the program, and I think some of you are here today. So I might have missed some, and you see if you can find your firm on there. But you're part of a bigger community, and I can see, there's big organisations like ANZ, for example, that huge public bank, like huge banking services, and then you've got someone like you've got to pick out Dixon Appointments. They have 20 people and 1 floor of an office building in the CBD. So it's all sorts, and all of these companies find resources that are relevant to them. I'll quickly go through this because if you're mostly sustainability professionals in law firms, you'd know this already. But when we mean net zero, we align with the University of Oxford's net zero emissions, which is basically do everything you can to reduce emissions physically first, and basically the remainder of the hard to avoid emissions are balanced by offsets, which is currently controversial if you've seen the news. But yeah, basically reduce your reliance on offsets as much as possible. Basically we want everybody to be Paris aligned. That joins the organisation. It's not a requirement, but basically as part of your commitment to joining the program, we want you to get to net zero at some point, basically. If you've got any more questions, then I can talk to you about it later on, but I can also give you this presentation as well. So that's pretty much it. I think that's it, me done. So Tanya, on to you. I might ask for any questions though before we go ahead. And if you could raise your hand, and then I'll be able to unmute you if you've got any questions. Any from in the room?
Well, Jack, I might just mention that obviously your members report on their scope 1 and 2 emissions, as you touched on earlier. So and I also mentioned how there's a mutual benefit of being an AusLSA and CitySwitch member in the fact that, well, AusLSA members report through our AusLSA reporting tool. So then if they haven't already captured their emissions through the AusLSA reporting tool, they will have a good understanding of what their scope 1 and 2 emissions are, which then can feed into your CitySwitch reporting.
Yeah, and you're right. We talked about this before, and like the information you asked for, and the information that we asked for is pretty much the overlapping Venn diagram, I would say. Yeah. So I suppose a lot of you would already be capturing the data that you need to report on to join the program. Thanks, Paul. That's a good point.
Okay, thanks so much, Jack. As a proud CitySwitch and AusLSA member, it's a pleasure to be able to participate in today and to share some of my knowledge. Thank you so much, Sybil. I've already been introduced, so I will skip 25 years on a page. Suffice to say, I'm a subject matter expert in sustainable procurement and supply chains. I was a contributor to the ISO standard, and today's topic, I have lots of insights as my team and I had previously in Edge Impact helped develop in partnership with CitySwitch, the greening the supply chain tools that are accessible. I would just like to point out that quote. I love a good quote. It brings things to life. And this is from the previous CEO from the Science Based Target Initiative. So anyone that's been starting to look into whether it's mandatory reporting or not, scope 3 is where decarbonisation happens in practice. And today is around what can we practically integrate into our own businesses or firms to be able to deliver decarbonisation and circular economy outcomes. So you've seen the agenda. It's around what can we do internally? How do we actually set up our internal processes and align to be able to deliver? What is supply chain engagement and how do you prepare for it? Because it's not issuing a questionnaire. And then Jack will provide some insights into some fantastic tools and tactics that exist that you're able to readily access for free. So I just wanted to start with some common themes across the legal sector. So I'm only 6 months or a little bit less in the legal sector. And so coming in, I did a scan to be able to understand what were norms and to be able to benchmark against peers, to then be able to inform how I wanted to implement here at Landers. And so what I found was that there are very limited references to materiality that inform firms' strategies and their implementation that's accessible externally. There's very limited external disclosure that includes sustainability targets, metrics, progress, and effectiveness. There's very limited external verifiable evidence or quantification of claims that might be on websites or in reports. And also across the legal sector, we know, and I think that this is both a benefit as well as a burden, that we are considered very low risk when it comes to human rights or modern slavery risks. We have low emissions intensity, and we're a medium to high circular economy opportunity. So if we're doing an assessment of us as a supplier, that would be our rating. There are very easy or low hanging fruit decarbonisation opportunities. The first one being, it's very easy to wipe out your scope 2, 100% green power. One of the key focus areas that all law firms should be looking at if in the decarbonisation program would be travel programs. So business and employee commuting, what are the incentives and opportunities there? And I think across the board, we could look at between 80 to 95% of our scope 3 sits with our purchase goods and services. So that's a norm. Like none of us are special. We would all be looking at and prioritising the same things there. We know that clients are starting to require targets or reporting against our net zero or our annual carbon emissions, both from a membership as well as if you're a part of a government legal panel. There's also requirements around our pro bono work and being able to quantify hours, etc. there. Under the Gender Equality Act, we have obligations for reporting, and there's also, again, generally our government clients are looking for local employment evidence to support communities. Almost across the board, we're also being asked under sustainable procurement, what's our First Nations spend or social procurement targets and spend? Are we focusing on buy local? Payment times and compliance against that legislation or regime. All of us have anti-modern slavery risk and statement obligations. Circular economy and life cycle thinking, again, is being driven by particularly the Commonwealth, and then there's environmental initiatives. So we have many common themes, and we have very common risks and very common opportunities. So collaboration is key. And we've heard a lot about mandatory disclosure. I was surprised I was unable to find anything that was really a negative headline, because I do like a little sensationalism. So I was unable to pop anything on this particular slide. But we know that climate reporting, and particularly if you're coming from a consulting background for sustainability, it is the hottest topic. And for us, we are a part of our client's scope 3. So law firms are an integral part, and we're also considered mature, we're well funded, and our clients are looking for us to be able to provide them credible data to meet their own obligations underneath the Act. So whether or not it applies to us, we are a key component of scope 3 supply chain for our clients as a supplier. But one of the things that I find a little frustrating and is a red flag for me is that reporting is merely the communication of the actions that have been undertaken. So focusing on reporting as the end outcome is a furphy, because the amount of time and effort to be able to prepare for reporting, we needed to start last year. And the fantastic mandatory disclosure webinars that CitySwitch have been offering, I've been participating. Often we will find almost no attention to what that means from a supply chain engagement piece. So today is a complementary and very dedicated focus on how do we actually engage our supply chain to be able to measure our own progress, but also to be able to have credible data to provide both reporting and our clients. But it's really important that it's not just the sustainability initiative, it is a cross-functional requirement across the business. We need operations, procurement, if they exist, and particularly finance, to be able to shift the needle internally. It is not just a sustainability function. And by actually upskilling and engaging cross-functionally, we'll drive innovation, we'll have better handle on operational costs and reductions, and we can increase our credibility because it's actually integrated, which is then a differentiation or a client benefit. So I'm constricted by 30 minutes, which is anyone that knows me, that's quite a challenge for me because I've got lots that I can talk about on this subject. So I've narrowed it down to kind of 4 key themes. Starting with, how do we identify what's material? So there's organisational materiality, and I've done this in sequence. And whether or not you have all these things in place, this is my recommendation because this is how you actually have targeted and meaningful internal alignment to be able to deliver. So organisational materiality, what's important for your business, whether or not you're actually reporting against double materiality. So financial risk, and that can include things like client service-based emissions as a potential financial materiality topic. You can see there's a list of other ideas there. Impact materiality, which is when we're looking at things that matter to the community but might not necessarily have a financial implication, and that's underneath environment and social. So what is the alignment to the values and contextualising that for the firm. The same things aren't going to apply because it's really how you deliver and what you're living as a part of your own particular business. Access to justice, I think, is quite common across the sector. Where we're looking at carbon emissions, First Nations engagement, etc. And then you combine the two to have a double materiality impact and integrated report. So that's at that organisational level. What is important? What is material? And that term material is going to be consistent language throughout this whole presentation. Because then we're looking at operational materiality. So almost all of us have done our carbon footprint. And so that gives us a carbon baseline around what is high intensity and what should we be focusing on. But how many of us, and if you haven't done this, I strongly recommend that you do a ESG impact on your spend. So looking at the opportunities for environment, for social, for governance, broken down by your GL. You can see an example here. When you create an operational baseline, you have this fantastic opportunity of cascading and connected priorities. What that does is it aligns all of your internal staff towards common goals. Everyone knows what they're working towards. You understand what is material at the organisational level. It helps establish clear objectives and priorities to work towards. It then highlights what are material risks that need to be managed, which then informs your supply chain engagement approach. So not a cookie cutter approach. Where to direct your due diligence effort, which is actually quite a lot of time. What is the level of engagement? We don't want to boil the ocean. So we want to be talking and prioritising where we're going to get the maximum outcome, whether it's risk mitigation or opportunities. How we then have a clause bank or technical criteria to ensure integration consistently. How we evaluate, because we're not asking for information if we're not going to do something about it. And then what's the ongoing contracting obligations for performance management and to feed into your own internal reporting. Once we understand what's material, it then has a flow through into our targets and strategies. So the firm's strategy, which should embed ESG right at the heart, which then has an aligned sustainability strategy. So how do we actually implement and operationalise the values and mission? Enterprise risk management framework, which incorporates ESG within that. We know that the board needs to have oversight of ESG risks underneath the disclosure, but also for good practice. Sustainability policy, it could be an environment policy, it could be a human rights policy. My personal preference is to combine them all so that you've got a single policy that talks to the material ESG risks and opportunities for the firm. How that then flows down to a sustainable procurement policy. So how do we actually integrate those material topics into what we buy and how we engage? And then summarising that in a supplier code of conduct, which should become a contract mechanism. So referencing the code of conduct as a part of of any supply agreement. And by doing that, we're clearly communicating what matters to our individual firms. When we've done that, we're now setting time-based or smart targets. So at the organisational level, and this is just an example of what it could look like. So SBT, we're in the process, or we'll be verifying our SBT targets, which are time-based and specific, both short-term and long-term. That then flows through to how do I prioritise within our procurement targets? Do they have a percentage of suppliers by X date have a science-based target aligned, and then to be able to inform the discussion with those suppliers and how many of those suppliers and over what period of time I'm going to be talking to. Then category or product specific. So if we're going to decarbonise, then that needs to go down to the category or tailored approach so that it's relevant and targeted. So by aligning materiality, integration across all of our strategies and targets that cascade down, and then informing even how we go down to a spend category and supplier level, what we're doing is we're able to provide evidence. See over on the right, the data capture effectively process, and this is more focused on emissions than it is anything else, just for the purposes here. But it's important to note that, and I'll come to this in the next slide, that there's actual commonality across the types of data that you need to collect across the ESG topics. So, you know, carbon footprint, we've already created a baseline. Then we've got sustainable procurement, how we engage and get the information as a part of contracting. Supplier engagement, to then be able to really understand the credibility and help coach. And then your data collection protocol, which is a consistent process to be able to refresh and build your own iterative maturity. So you start with yourself before you start speaking to suppliers. So have you done an assessment and understand what data you currently have? What's your general ledger taxonomy or categorization look like? Does it make sense? Is that something that needs to be focused on and improved? What do you have checklists, and what is the quality of data entry internally? How can you improve that and build capability internally? Because rubbish in, rubbish out. And do you have existing system tagging to make your life easy when it comes to reporting? So if you can tag data and topics as it comes into your systems, it makes life much easier and much more efficient later when you're trying to access that information for your own reporting purposes. Are you looking at supplier organisational information? Have you assessed what they've already got public? What is their commitments and key policies? And are you looking at the efficacy of what they're providing when you're asking for evidence? Are you asking for evidence? And what does that mean? Geographic data. So are we asking for country of origin? Often at the start of the journey, we'll note that most of the information is related to the contracting entity. So for landers, I think 98% of our suppliers are considered Australian. That doesn't necessarily mean the goods are coming from Australia. It just means that right now the data that we're capturing is that the entity is based here in Australia. To really be able to understand the risks and opportunities, particularly when it comes to emissions, we need to start to understand the country of origin. Fortunately, that's also applicable if we're doing modern slavery risk analysis, as well as nature-based impacts, biodiversity, etc. And are we asking for the level of detail around product or commodity? So are we getting those environmental product declarations? If we're not, that's something that can be considered for specific categories. And I think that for law firms, the most relevant this is when we are doing fit outs. So when is the data collected? Is it ad hoc? Do we have a due diligence process in place where we're capturing that information? Are we issuing supplier self-assessment questionnaires? And if we are, what do we do with the information? When do we time that? Are we getting information from supplier invoices? Are we getting dashboard reporting monthly or quarterly? Or are we also looking at internal surveys, which I would assume, yes, if we're reporting on employee community. And where do we store it? Is it Excel? Is it a finance system? Do we have access to external third-party reporting platforms? How are we pulling that all together? Is it independently assured? Our own data, not our supply chain. Are we assessing things as they come in? Do we have a technical evaluation in place? Are we contracting specifically based on the information that we're being provided? And do we actually put in place action and improvement plans, and how do we scorecard and collect that as well? So that's a lot of opportunity to collect really enriched data. But if we're not there yet, that's totally fine. The purpose is understanding where you currently are. We're collecting data in lots of different, if we've got financial data, which is really useful, we are developing and publishing modern slavery statements, which means that there is some type of risk and opportunity mapping, which can be augmented to incorporate carbon and circularity, and most of us will have a carbon footprint. We can leverage technology. We don't need to have sophisticated external platforms. We can use Microsoft suites to be able to collate from multiple different sources. But we do need to actually be purposeful by defining our data management protocols. We can consolidate those reports and outputs from the ecosystem that we might have in place. And we can iterate based on data integrity, as long as we're being purposeful around where we are now and understanding where we want to go. But I popped in the middle, having an executive dashboard to provide that highest body governance oversight and internal stakeholder engagement is a really lovely way to get our executive teams across what we're doing and why it matters. So that's the as-is assessment of what we've got in place so that we can update and integrate within existing processes. So once we've done that, this is when we're now ready to start to consider how we're going to engage the supply chain. And this is really important because the way that we actually talk to our suppliers. These are, from my perspective, the kind of 6 key criteria. So first of all, are we aligned? Are we really clear around what matters to us as a firm and why we're asking suppliers to provide us anything? Are we communicating clearly to the supplier why they're being engaged? Do they have an understanding around what it is that we intend to do? And have we connected policy, code and contract to make it simple for suppliers to understand what our own goals and targets are? Then are we being really specific and targeted with the supplier themselves? So is it specific to their business, their risk and their opportunity? And is it proportionate? So the concept of proportionality is really important. We don't want to ask a sole trader caterer for their scope 3 emissions because that's an onerous burden and it's not really going to be very material to us. So why would we ask a supplier that is not at that level of maturity for information that's really not very meaningful for us? So are we considering the supplier maturity and the size so that we can tailor how we engage with them? And are we only asking for what we're going to use rather than a tick and flick, we think we need to ask all of these things? Well, if you're not going to use the information, don't ask for it because it's a burden on the suppliers. When we do engage them, clarity in our communication. So not using jargon, but being simple and concise around what it is that we're asking for. While it might seem very logical, often we're all guilty of it, we will use complex language when it's actually unnecessary. factual. So it's not just around greenwashing. It's around providing assurance and clear information around what we intend to use the information for. It's not so much of a challenge for our industry as it is for others, but there's also a lack of trust around and commercial implications around providing levels of granularity as a supplier to the organisation. So being sensitive to that and also providing commitment around what we intend to use the information for. Being really clear around what we must have versus what we're working towards and would really appreciate if possible. And if it's not currently possible, what are the support tools and templates that we are willing to share to be able to help encourage our supply chain to get there? It's also an efficiency benefit because if we are issuing format, then it makes it easier for us to collate and to digest. Is it timely? So being like, we're all working towards the end of the financial year. Does that mean that in June there's a big rush of questionnaires that go out to our supply chain to be able to satisfy our own end of year reporting that starts in July, or the collation of that? Are we being clear around how frequently we need the information? So are we asking suppliers for monthly updates from a waste management perspective and updating that, or are we looking at an annual frequency? My recommendation is always ask for the information a couple of months before you actually need to do anything, because it gives you the opportunity to have discussion and to question, to ensure that the credibility of the claims exist in a way that you're comfortable with sharing. The implementation timeline, this is when we're looking at, we never want to cut off suppliers if they're not at the level of maturity that we're after. However, if we're going to meet our science-based targets or decarbonisation targets, there is a point where we need to say, well, we're actually going to preference suppliers that are able to demonstrate decarbonisation for the areas that are high intensity or material to our organisation. But that should be a phased approach. So that, like, being clear around, well, by 2028, 80% of our supply chain needs to be science-based target aligned. That gives our suppliers the opportunity to collaborate or to turn around and say that's not something that they're interested in, and therefore you can make supply decisions based on that. And also, don't give them 5 days to respond. Let's be reasonable with that response period, and that's closely linked to being considerate. So suppliers will often have a fear if they are not at the level of maturity that they think that they need to ask. Again, not such a big deal for the legal sector, but if it's a really large proportion of their income, there's genuine fear around not being able to meet the standards that they're being asked for, and a lack of confidence in being able to reach out and have a conversation around what are you looking for and how can we work together to be able to get there. But also from us, like, what's the mutual benefits and incentives that we can offer our suppliers to help them get there? The lovely thing about sustainable procurement is that it's working towards a win-win outcome rather than a transactional and you must type of language. And that's really closely related to being relational or relationship-based rather than purely transactional. And it does take time and effort. It's a multi-year program because there are conversations that need to occur. But hopefully by prioritising and knowing where to start based on intensity or impact, that provides the opportunity even for very clear. So that's your communication plan and strategy established. You're really clear with what you're wanting and how to ask for it. And you're also able to bring your best foot forward by being nice about it as well. And then there's the collaboration piece. Like, it's really important to know that no individual or single organisation is able to achieve decarbonisation on their own. It is a collaboration, and particularly with your suppliers. But again, like, really calling out that it is a cross-functional internal collaboration first and foremost before you go out, and ensuring that your own participants are confident and capable. So behaviour change, capacity building, cheat sheets, these are all things that we're often so busy focused on getting the end outcomes that we might not spend the time to be able to actually manage internal change. And this is a business transformation when it's done well, because true integration requires everybody to understand what they're doing and why. Supplier. So are we providing them feedback around ratings and catching up with them and having open discussions? They can be formal or informal. We're not really large teams, and this is not a super complicated supply chain. So taking the time to actually meet with suppliers to be able to encourage those end outcomes is wonderful. So role-based, ensuring that you're reaching out to others that share similar titles, particularly outside of the legal sector. We can sometimes have echo chambers. So what are norms for Australian businesses? And CitySwitch is a great opportunity to be able to understand what's going on across Australian businesses rather than just in the legal sector. And I strongly encourage my peers to do that. Industry, so looking at those Australian business programs, topic specific. So Jack mentioned mandatory disclosure. Today we're talking about supply chain. There's some great communities of practice. If you're a member of the UNGCA, they do some like fantastic and globally aligned sessions or forums. And then sector specific. So thanks to Paul and AusLSA for continually providing us with tools and guidelines that are specific and nuanced for our own context. So that's my very quick 101 on supply chain, and hopefully that helps guide relevance and materiality to be able to actually bring to life an evidence, vision, and values. So I will hand over to Jack.
Jump on to the next slide quickly. I've just got one more slide, but we've got resources to help with everything that Tanya said. Go to cityswitch.net.au and basically look in our resources section under Commit Across Your Value Chain. We've got heaps of stuff there. So there's case studies, 3 guides, and a webinar from last year. And very similar actually to the topic that was covered today around how to apply these guides to understand your supply chain emissions. So basically have a look at that, and if you're interested in joining the program or learning more about CitySwitch, then you can contact me and I'll send some links in a follow-up email after the session. So that's enough, I think. I'll get people to ask some questions. So I've posted in the chat with the Q&A section on Teams, feel free to send a message through there, but also use the raise your hand function on Teams if you'd like to ask a question, and I'll unmute you. I'll see if we can allow people to unmute themselves as well.
Just before we go to that, I know that there's been discussion or questions around appropriate platforms. We had one this morning before the event, and there's been some emails with some of the lovely people on this call as well. If you listen to the webinar, it will actually, on the CitySwitch site, it talks about, and there was interviews with different types of organisations and their approach to automation and selection of technology to be able to help the data collation process. So I think that that's an excellent case study to be able to hear from different types of maturities and businesses around what worked for them and what didn't work, as ways to avoid very expensive systems if you're not there yet. So I'd just like to call that one out.
I have a question from Michelle, sitting out in Oakland, so excuse the chat question. Can you please explain a bit more about the requirement to be involved in SBTI to be a CitySwitch member? We're climate active, carbon neutral, waiting on third and the current exploring setting to SBTI. You don't have to be an SBTI member to join CitySwitch. You don't actually have to have any sort of like net zero certification. It's just sort of like we encourage you to use one of those frameworks to measure, your emissions to be climate leader. So you can join CitySwitch. There's no issue with that. So thanks for the question, Michelle. Any other questions?
did have a question actually. This is it's I guess it's quite particular, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on I guess the material impact of firms leveraging AI use and what kind of criteria firms should be aware of in their supply chain when they are considering that emerging technology.
Oh, good question.
Big topic at the moment.
Yes. So if I take it back to the category specific, so if we're looking at AI use, we know that there are high intensity around energy consumption, water, as well as there are human rights historical violations. So by understanding what the risks and the opportunities are, that then informs around the questions that you would ask around any of your providers. And for example, Landers, we use the Microsoft Copilot function. So by asking, and the wonderful thing about the big tech providers is that they have been under the limelight for quite some time. So scrutiny is something that they're used to, and they're able to provide the due diligence, the carbon emissions, where things are, and also what their roadmap of initiatives to be able to mitigate some of those risks. I know AWS recently announced that they were able to provide any of their customers the proportion of emissions related to the use of AI. The efficacy of that is somewhat questionable, but ultimately what it is that that particular industry is aware of those risks and opportunities, and by asking you should be able to get the information. Again, it's around your own risk tolerance. And I think also having a targeted approach to AI. So I am a purist, but you use internet search for basic function and being really targeted around what you're using your AI system for so that you can actually reduce your own contribution to those emissions. That's the summary.
Any other questions from online or in the room? That's it.
Well, Tanya, I might actually ask one for you. So as many of our members may already be aware, at AusLSA, we're enhancing the sort of scope of our reporting tool to include additional scope 3 categories, that being supply chain related emissions, which is category 1 of scope 3, purchase goods and services. And you talked a lot about the importance of collecting data. How can some of our members start collecting data now to be prepared for reporting on those emissions? So we'll probably be using a spend-based approach method for capturing purchase goods and services related emissions. Now, I think a lot of that data probably sits within accounting or finance teams. How can our members that sit in sustainability roles be prepared for getting that data so that they can do that for potentially this next reporting cycle?
Excellent. Yes, very front of mind. So it depends on how old your carbon footprint is. So all of that information for any AusLSA member that needs to report around Cat 1, S3 will exist in the carbon inventory tool to be able to come up with that carbon footprint. Now, if the data in there is more than a year old, then my suggestion is there are some large firms that do have dedicated teams. They would already be collecting that information, and it's around limited assurance or having an external independent verify and update those carbon, the emissions factors. I personally have gone through and worked with our fabulous data and analytics team to start to review what is the level of granularity in our existing GLs. So knowing what, so being able to provide a rating around how good our data quality is, which then informs what next year's program of works to increase the credibility. So we've got enough data and at a level that we're able to share knowing that it has been third-party verified. But what it was really insightful was around how we can potentially partner with the finance team to improve how we are categorising our financial spend and going down to additional levels of granularity, which will then help me move away from assumptions-based reporting to supplier-specific factors.
Yep. So that breakdown of spend is categorized in a way that aligns with different sort of purchase goods and services that have the corresponding emissions factors, so that it's essentially, yeah, you've got that breakdown of spend that's aligned in a way that's able to capture your emissions accurately.
Yeah, and I think most of us are climate active members, so using the national greenhouse accounts for those factors, we have access to that information. So being able to use that and then be able to inform how we can iterate our own maturity. And that includes how we label things, what our systems, how we tag them when they come in. So now I have a really good snapshot of our own landscape and where I need to prioritise effort.
Great.
All wrapped up.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're at time. So thank you, Tanya, for a very informative presentation. Thank you everyone for attending and online as well. Appreciate your time this morning and coming along to learn about this stuff. Thank you for Paul for organising and coordinating with your members. So yeah, we'll try and provide a recording as soon as possible. If you get any more questions about this presentation or CitySwitch, please reach out to me. You can find my details on the About Us section on the website.
I look forward to collaborating with the rest of the legal sector over the next coming months and years. And thank you very much for coming. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out. We're stronger together.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks,
Great.
Jane.
Thank you.